My name is Camille Reyes. When I was 19, my sister called me an embarrassment. A week later, my father changed the locks. My mother left a bag of clothes on the porch. No goodbye. Just silence. For 15 years, I disappeared, changed my name, burned every trace of who I was. Not because I was ashamed, but because I knew they'd never let me rise if they saw me. This isn't a story of revenge. It's a story of return, of rebuilding, of choosing to stand even when no one claps. If you're still here, say hi in the comments. I promise you're not alone. They said I was a disgrace, that I brought shame to the Reyes name. At 19, I was cast out, no warning, no mercy, just a locked door and a bag on the porch. For years, I vanished, new name, new city, no trace of who I'd been. Not because I was broken, but because I was becoming. They tried to silence me, but silence, I've learned, doesn't mean surrender. It means storing power until you're ready to rise. And the day I walked into that courtroom, no longer a secret, but a sitting governor, they all turned. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about reclaiming truth, one voice at a time. And mine starts here. Camille turned 19 on a day the sky forgot how to decide. It wasn't raining, but it wasn't clear either. The clouds hung low like something waiting to be said. She spent the morning sketching on the back of a receipt, her fingers smudged with graphite. By evening, she was back at the Reyes dining table, sitting at the far end exactly where she always did, close enough to listen, never close enough to matter. The room smelled like lemon oil and slow-cooked beans. The chandelier above cast soft light on the polished wood of the table, gleaming like a stage. It was Sunday dinner, a tradition her father Manuel Reyes enforced like doctrine. At the head of the table, he raised a glass to Isabella, the firstborn, the future of the family name. Her image flickered across the muted television. District Attorney of Bezar County quoted on CNN, draped in legal authority and political promise. "That's my girl," Manuel said, proudly beaming. Isabella smiled politely, sipping her wine. Camille sat with her fork, paused mid-air, eyes lowered to her plate. No one asked how her graduation went the week before. No one even mentioned it. She had earned a degree in humanities, neither law nor medicine. She hadn't told them the date. She knew they wouldn't come. She had always been the strange one, the one who drew faces instead of arguments, who carried Simone Weil and Rilke in her backpack instead of casebooks. She spoke in silences. She painted at dawn. Her brilliance didn't come in the form they understood, and they made no effort to understand it. After dinner, while clearing the table, Isabella followed her into the kitchen. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply said, "You're an embarrassment to this family." Camille didn't respond right away. The words hung there more haunting than if she'd screamed. She wanted to laugh, part of her did, because it wasn't the first time Isabella had looked at her like that, like a stain that couldn't be scrubbed out. But something about that moment, the finality of it, cut different. It wasn't even what Isabella said. It was how she said it, like it was inevitable. 1 week later, Camille got home from her job at the campus library to find the key no longer worked. Her fingers froze on the knob. She tried again. Nothing. On the porch, there was a single black duffel bag. Her sketchbooks were inside a few t-shirts, a toothbrush, and a note in her mother's handwriting that read, "Only take care of yourself." No goodbye, no explanation, just silence. She sat on the porch steps for a long time waiting. Maybe for someone to come outside. Maybe for herself to wake up. But no one came. No one opened the door. Inside, her family moved on, ate dinner, watched the news, laughed at something Isabella said. To them, she wasn't missing. She was removed. They said she was reckless, unstable, unfit to represent the Reyes name. But the truth was Camille couldn't stay quiet anymore. About the things they covered up, about the deals they made behind closed doors. She had seen too much and said too little for too long. They called it betrayal. But betrayal, Camille would later learn, is often just honesty spoken aloud in a room that depends on silence. That night, she slept in her friend's car. The next night, too. By the 7th night, the car wasn't an option anymore. By the 10th, she was on a Greyhound bus heading north, destination unclear. Denver, maybe. Or wherever nobody knew her last name. As the wheels hummed beneath her, she opened her backpack and found a leather-bound notebook, one her mother used to write family birthdays and recipes in. Camille stared at it for a moment. Then with quiet hands, she began tearing out each page, one by one, feeding them to a lighter flame behind the bus station. Not out of hatred, but necessity. Because sometimes survival isn't about holding on. It's about letting go of who you were told you had to be. Denver greeted her not with promise, but with indifference. The sky was a slab of concrete, and the wind carried the scent of salt and old stone. Camille stepped off the bus with her red backpack slung over one shoulder, the same one she'd carried since her first year of college, back when her name still meant something. Back when she still believed that blood meant protection, that family meant home. She didn't have a place to go, only a direction away. The first week was survival by instinct. She couch surfed, slept in strangers' living rooms. On day 4, she spent the night in a coin laundromat with fluorescent lights that hummed like judgment. By day 7, she'd scraped enough cash to rent a room in a crumbling Victorian house that had been divided into units too small to be legal. Her room was in the basement, low ceilings, one flickering light bulb, and a window the size of a shoebox. The pipes moaned in their sleep. Mice made no effort to hide. The mattress was stained. The walls were yellowed with stories that didn't belong to her. But it was hers, and no one asked questions. On the door, she taped a single handwritten note, Cam R Unit 1B. No full name. No trace of Reyes. She stood there a long time staring at it. Something broke in her, then not a dramatic collapse, but a quiet, irreversible undoing, like thread slipping from a seam. She realized she didn't want the name anymore. Not because it hurt, though it did. Not because it reminded her of being cast out, though it did that too. But because it had become a costume she was no longer willing to wear. The name Reyes had once made her feel part of something bigger. Now it only reminded her of smallness, of being made to shrink, to fit their mold. They had used that name like a weapon. You carry the Reyes legacy. You represent something bigger than yourself. Don't embarrass the family. But when she needed them, when she was the one broken, violated, bleeding, they didn't protect her. They protected the name. So she let it go. In the job center, when the clipboard was passed to her, she didn't hesitate. Camille Reyes hovered in her mind like an echo and then vanished. She wrote Cam R. She stared at it for a moment, then signed. That signature felt more like a vow than anything she'd ever said in church. Camille worked, not to dream, not to climb, just to eat. She served pancakes in the morning at a greasy diner where the floors were always sticky and the coffee burned your tongue. She never gave her real name to customers. Just Cam. No backstory, no explanation. Just a tired smile. In the afternoon, she cleaned floors at a small medical clinic. Her uniform was 2 sizes too big, her gloves always a little too thin. She scrubbed exam room sinks still wet with other people's tears. She emptied trash bins full of tissues and secrets. Evenings were for data entry. She stared at spreadsheets until the numbers blurred and her fingers ached. No one knew who she was. No one cared. At night, when the city fell quiet and the traffic faded into a low, steady hum, she pulled out her notebook, the one with half its pages torn, and wrote in the code she'd invented as a child, a language only she understood. There were no full sentences, just fragments. Don't look back. You are not what they called you. Pain is not the whole story. Keep walking. Sometimes she cried, quietly, only for herself. But most nights she just sat in silence, letting the ache settle like dust. She had dreams still, faint things that came in flashes. A classroom, a gallery wall, a courtroom where no one asked whose daughter she was, a place where what she did mattered more than who she was born to. But those dreams felt far, fragile, untouchable. What wasn't fragile, what grounded her, was the understanding that she owed them nothing. Not a phone call, not an explanation, not even anger. Anger would mean she still expected something: love, remorse, accountability. But Camille had long since learned you cannot grieve people who never saw you. She cut her hair one morning without ceremony, took the scissors from the kitchen drawer, and stood before the mirror in her bathroom. The strands fell into the sink like petals off a dying flower. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't grief. It was a shedding. Every snip whispered, "Not for them, not anymore." She looked at her reflection after and saw someone else. Someone leaner, sharper, unfinished, but honest. For the first time in a long time, she felt like herself. Not Camille Reyes, daughter of Manuel, not the forgotten sister of Isabella, not the girl in the video. Just Cam, not hiding, just surviving, just beginning. The night it happened, Camille had just finished mopping the last exam room at the clinic. It was after midnight, the building half asleep under fluorescent lights and soft echoes. She was exhausted, bone deep, soul weary, but ready to sink into the silence that waited for her in her tiny basement room. Then she heard it. A sharp male voice snapped down the hallway firm and commanding in Spanish, "Firma aquí." "It's already processed. Just sign." Camille froze. Another voice followed this one. Trembling higher, panicked a woman's voice, pleading, confused, clinging to her child. Camille turned the corner. A woman stood there, no older than 30, holding a crying toddler wrapped in a too-thin jacket. Facing her was a uniformed officer with a clipboard, his tone rigid, posture impatient. Camille's voice cut through the hallway before she could think. "She doesn't understand." The officer turned to her, surprised, and demanded, "Who are you?" Camille stepped closer, her chest tight but her gaze steady. "She's not signing that," she said firmly. The officer narrowed his eyes. "You got authority here?" Camille didn't blink. "Your software's outdated. That form's invalid. If she signs it, it won't hold." It wasn't true. She didn't care. He hesitated, muttered something under his breath, then turned and left. The woman didn't thank her. She didn't need to. Her tears said everything. Camille walked home through the dark, her hands still shaking, not from fear, but from something else. Something warm, unfamiliar, almost holy. She had done something. For someone. She hadn't just survived that night, she had mattered. A week later, she was called into a cramped office at the clinic. She expected reprimand, maybe termination. Instead, she found herself sitting across from a man in a faded blazer with kind eyes and exhaustion etched into his smile. Rafael Delgado, director of Procto Libe, leaned forward and said simply, "I heard what you did." Camille braced herself, unsure what was coming. "Most people don't step in like that," he added. She met his gaze, quiet but steady. "Most people still have something to lose," she said. He smiled. "Come work for us. Not as a cleaner. Anything, everything, whatever you're willing to learn." Camille started from the bottom again. She photocopied flyers, made coffee, drove scared clients to court, translated documents. But she watched. She listened. She learned. She studied budget reports like novels, wrote grant applications like manifestos, and took online policy courses at night. Slowly, purpose began to take the place of pain. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building. Not a home, not yet, but a kind of worth that didn't depend on being someone's daughter. One evening, after helping a Honduran family secure emergency housing, a young intern asked why she did what she did. Camille didn't hesitate. She looked up from her desk, eyes tired but clear, and said, "I don't have a family to go back to, so I'm building a place where I might belong." She didn't use the word home. It still felt like a wound, but as she returned to her work, she realized something: she hadn't disappeared. She had transformed, and sometimes a quiet life built on purpose was more powerful than any name ever given to her. The clinic was still that night, so still it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Camille sat alone in the supply room, a mop handle propped beside her, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound for miles. But inside her, something stirred. Not restlessness, not fear. Something quieter, deeper. The echo of the confrontation earlier that week had not faded. That mother's terrified eyes, the officer's cold authority, the lie that had slipped from Camille's lips wrapped in truth's intention. It should have ended there, a flicker of defiance quickly forgotten, but it didn't. It lodged in her chest like an ember. Not blinding, not destructive, just persistent. A slow, steady burn that refused to die out. And without warning, word spread. Not through headlines or breaking news. Camille's act didn't carry cameras, but it traveled nonetheless, in lowered voices, in cautious nods, in the quiet respect of those who had learned to measure power in gestures, not speeches. Raphael noticed. He started inviting her into meetings she once only cleaned up after, asked her thoughts in rooms where words were usually filtered through degrees and last names, and Camille, though hesitant at first, began to answer, not with bravado, but with clarity. Then one afternoon, as she was leaving a fundraiser with a clipboard in one hand and grocery bags in the other, a staffer from the city's immigrant rights task force stopped her. A woman in a red scarf, sharp eyes behind tired glasses. "You speak like someone who already understands power," she said. "Ever thought of using that voice louder?" Camille didn't answer right away. How could she explain that her entire life had been trained in whispers, that power for her had always been something wielded against her, never by her? That even now when she opened her mouth, a small part of her still braced for punishment. But instead of saying all that, she simply smiled. A small, knowing smile. One that hinted, maybe I'm starting to. Weeks later, she found herself in the back row of a packed city council chamber, tucked into a plain black coat that did little to hide the tension in her shoulders. A councilman was at the podium, jaw like steel voice tight, as he argued for increased ICE enforcement in local shelters. Camille gripped the edge of her seat. She had seen the damage that proposal could do, had scrubbed it from the tile floors of the clinic in blood and tears and panic, and now here it was, policy pretending to be public service. When the floor opened for comment, she waited, just a breath, then rose. No one turned at first. She didn't look like much a woman in thrift store boots, hands clasped tight. But when she spoke, the room quieted. Her voice was calm, low, controlled, but it cut like clean glass. If the law refuses to grow with justice, she said, then justice stops being lawful and starts becoming ornamental. The pause that followed wasn't awkward, it was reverent. A few claps rose from the back, uncertain, but real. The councilman didn't answer. He didn't need to. Camille hadn't asked a question. She'd delivered a verdict. Afterward, she didn't linger. She turned to leave, but a voice called out, "Young Eager." A reporter barely out of school notebook already open. "We're doing a piece on emerging leaders," he said breathlessly. "Your voice, what you said, it resonated. Could we profile you, Camille Reyes, immigrant advocate? It's powerful." Camille's spine tensed. That name still hit like a bruise pressed too hard, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she looked past him to the city lit in fractured blues and golds outside the window. Her voice was steady. "You can write about me, but don't use my full name." The reporter blinked. "Why not?" She gave him a half smile. Not defensive, not afraid, just honest. Because I've already been seen in the worst possible way. Right now, I'd rather be heard. That night, snow gathered in the cuffs of her sleeves as she walked home. She didn't feel like a hero, didn't feel reborn, but she felt real solid in a way she hadn't for years. As though her words had rooted somewhere deeper than memory, deeper than name. She had spoken not for applause, not for recognition, but because silence had once cost her everything. And from now on, her voice would be a line she refused to erase again, even if no one clapped, even if no one remembered. She would still speak. Camille was no longer just the girl who once scrubbed clinic floors. In the nonprofit circles of Denver, she had become a name people knew, even if not the full name. C. Reese. A quiet force, sharp, principled, relentless. She wasn't loud, but people listened when she spoke. She drafted policy briefs that actually got read. She spoke at community panels without scripted notes. She corrected city attorneys with facts they didn't expect her to know. They started inviting her to advisory boards, task forces, budget meetings. And when she walked into those rooms still in her thrifted coats, still without makeup or entourage, people straightened up. But success didn't feel like triumph. It felt like glass clear breakable. Each step forward brought her closer to a question she kept pushing away. How long can I keep hiding who I was? Because even as she rose, she carried the ghost of who she'd been, the girl exiled for a video she never consented to, the daughter whose name became taboo in her own house. She hadn't forgotten. Not the porch light that never came on. Not the way her mother looked through her like glass. Not the sound of her father's voice saying, "You think we raised you for this?" So no, she hadn't forgiven them. Not really. But she hadn't let them win either. She carried their rejection like a stone in her coat pocket. Heavy but useful. It kept her grounded. Reminded her of why she worked late, why she pushed harder, why she said no to shortcuts. One night, Marion, the veteran staffer with a laugh like gravel and eyes that saw through steel, walked into Camille's office after hours. She set a mug of coffee on the desk and asked not unkindly, "You ever gonna stop hiding who you really are?" Camille looked up from the community grant she was reviewing. "They know who I am." "No," Marion said. "They know what you do." "But do they know what you survived?" Camille paused. Her eyes didn't flinch, but her voice dropped. "If I tell them," she said, "they'll stop seeing me and start seeing her. The girl in the headlines, the sister of the DA, the scandal." She tapped her pen twice slowly. "I'd rather they underestimate me than misremember me." Marion sat down across from her the way older women do when they're not offering advice, but truth. "You know," she said, "hiding isn't always survival. Sometimes it's surrender." Camille didn't respond, but the words stayed with her. That night she lit her usual candle, the same ritual, the same photograph on the windowsill, her family all dressed in white, all smiling, her own face scratched out with a silver coin. But this time she didn't blow out the flame right away. She stared into it as if daring it to speak, because something was coming, a shift. She could feel it in the way people looked at her now, like she belonged to something bigger, like they expected more. And maybe she was ready to give it to them, but not before she decided for herself what part of her past would walk with her and which parts would stay buried. She was no longer afraid of being seen. She was afraid of being misunderstood, and that more than anything would shape what came next. The announcement wasn't made on a stage. There were no fireworks, no campaign banners. Just a modest podium in a city park, the kind where people walk dogs and push strollers without looking up. Maybe 70 people gathered: neighbors, volunteers, undocumented mothers, retired teachers. Some came because they knew her work. Others came because they heard whispers. She's different. Camille stood under a soft patch of late autumn sun, wearing a navy coat and no makeup, her hair pulled back, her notes folded neatly in her pocket. When she stepped forward, she didn't clear her throat, didn't ask for silence. She didn't have to. Her voice, when it came, was low and unshaken. "I'm not here to represent a party," she said. "I'm here to represent the people who are never invited to the table, but who carry it on their backs every day." There was a pause, not for applause, but because the words landed. Heavy. Honest. Camille had decided weeks earlier in the quiet of her apartment that she would run for the Colorado State House of Representatives as an independent. No party machines, no endorsements from the old guard. Just her record, her reputation, and her refusal to play the game the way it had always been played. She didn't mention her past, didn't talk about where she came from, what she had lost, or who had tried to erase her. Her campaign materials bore no headshot, no family photos, no quotes from mentors. Just a simple slogan printed in clean type: "Let the work speak first." She wasn't running to prove something to her family. That would have been too easy, too reactive. She was running because every time she sat in those meetings, advisory boards, city task forces, budget hearings, she saw the same thing: decisions being made without the people most affected in the room. And she knew how that felt. She had lived it. A few hours after her speech, a local reporter tweeted a photo of her standing at the podium, sunlight catching the edge of her jaw. The caption read, "She didn't mention her background." But maybe that's what makes her the most honest person in this race. Overnight, her inbox flooded. Volunteers, donations, curiosity, and of course, criticism. Who is she really? What's she hiding? Isn't she the sister of? But Camille didn't flinch. She expected it, planned for it, built herself on top of it. She made her rounds in the community quietly. No door-knocking selfies, no smiling for optics. She listened. She took notes. She promised only what she could deliver. She showed up when no one else did at zoning meetings, school board hearings, shelter inspections. And she carried herself with the kind of calm that made even skeptics wonder, what does she know that we don't? Behind the scenes, her small campaign team worried. Should we prep for the media storm, they asked. What if your family tries to go public? Camille just looked up from her notes and said, "They already did, once. I survived it." What mattered now wasn't what the Reyes name had once meant. What mattered was what Camille meant now to the people who'd never had someone fight for them from the inside. And this time, she wasn't asking permission to speak. She was writing the microphone into her own hands. It started with a headline one Camille hadn't expected, but somehow wasn't surprised to see. District Attorney under investigation for evidence tampering, a typical political scandal on the surface. Until her eyes dropped to the name beneath, Isabella Reyes. She stared at it for a long moment, not in shock, not in rage, but in stillness, recognition. The kind that felt like watching a bridge you once walked across finally collapse after years of cracks. Her sister, the same sister who once leaned into their father's ear and whispered, "She's the one in the video." That whisper had detonated Camille's life. 15 years later, it echoed through her screen in the form of justice circling back. Her staff responded in a flurry. Press advisors scrambled into war mode. "We recommend a neutral stance," one said sharply. "You're polling strong. Don't jeopardize it." Another added, "This isn't your fight, Governor." Let the chips fall. Camille didn't argue. She just stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the Denver skyline. Her reflection stared back older now, hardened, whole. She didn't want to defend Isabella. She didn't even want to see her. but something deeper stirred an obligation not to family, but to memory, because there were too many ghosts in that courtroom, and one of them still wore Camille's face. She booked a flight to San Antonio under a private alias. No entourage, no announcement. No one knew she was gone until she was already there. Camille entered the courthouse through a service entrance, her heels quiet against the linoleum floor. She wore dark slacks, a long black coat, sunglasses that veiled half her face. Unassuming, anonymous almost. She moved like a shadow returning to the place that created it. And then she took a seat in the very back where the overlooked and exiled often sat. The place that had once been hers. The courtroom was icy and clinical, bathed in fluorescent light. Reporters hunched over glowing screens. Lawyers murmured with restrained urgency. At the front, Isabella sat in a sleek gray suit, every detail meticulous. But Camille saw it, the white-knuckled fists resting on her lap, the shallow breaths, the slight tremor in her jaw. Camille had seen those signs before, at dinner tables, at family interventions, in the long moments before their father's judgment fell. Then Judge Audrey Jameson entered. Camille remembered her a formidable woman with wisdom in her posture and steel in her voice. They'd once spoken briefly at a policy summit. Now the judge scanned the room with practiced vigilance until her gaze caught something. Froze, did a double take. Then she leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. "Wait, is that Camille Reyes, the governor?" And the room ruptured. Heads turned like a wave. Reporters gasped. Screens lit up. Cameras swiveled on their tripods. At the front of the room, Isabella stiffened her head, whipping toward the back. Her face paled. Her mouth parted slightly in disbelief. Next to her, Teresa Reyes, immaculate in a pearl-trimmed jacket, looked as if the breath had been ripped from her lungs. She touched her crucifix, whispered something that might have been prayer or plea or apology. Manuel Reyes leaned forward slowly, his aging face drawn in shadow. His eyes squinted like he was trying to make sense of a ghost that had stepped out of his past and into power. But Camille didn't move. She didn't nod. She didn't wave. She just sat there, her spine a straight line of silence and defiance. Her very presence had already spoken volumes. No words were needed. The judge gathered herself. "Let's proceed," she said crisply. But the atmosphere never settled. Whispers bloomed and wilted. Cameras flicked back to her seat again and again. Camille didn't speak. She hadn't come to offer testimony. Not to comfort. Not to condemn. She came to witness. To stand as a living counterweight to the story they'd tried to erase. When the hearing adjourned, she rose slowly, collected her coat, and walked out the same way she came, in silence, through the side doors, through the corridor, where discarded things linger. By the time she reached her hotel, her phone was vibrating nonstop. Missed calls from national newsrooms, texts from campaign staff, screenshots of tweets and breaking news alerts. Her name was everywhere. But this time, it wasn't shame that brought her there. It was presence. Later, she stood by the window of her hotel room, looking out at a city she once called home. Her reflection floated on the glass, not diminished, not hidden. Older, weathered, seen. She hadn't come back to reclaim a place at the table. She came to remind them who they tried to bury. Camille Reyes had returned. Not as a daughter, not as a sister, but as a reckoning. It didn't even take a day. By the time sunlight cracked over the Rockies, Camille's name had flooded every screen, every news cycle, every political thread from coast to coast. Governor Reyes stuns courtroom with silent return. The other Reyes rises. 15 years vanished. Now she's back. They spun it like folklore, like they discovered a buried queen. Her silence became poetry. Her reappearance a redemption arc for the media to devour. For years, Camille had wrapped her last name in service and silence, turning it from a wound into a watermark. But now the world was peeling that wrapping back, holding the name up to the light like it had just found gold. like her survival hadn't cost her everything. At first, the coverage was almost reverent. The ghost daughter who refused to haunt. Stoic, dignified, resilient. There were op-eds calling her a symbol of quiet strength, some even suggesting she was the true legacy of the Reyes family. And then it surfaced. Not her speeches, not her legislative work, not her nights spent cleaning clinics or rewriting policies. The video, grainy, stolen, weaponized, 15 years old and still sharp enough to cut her open. A moment she never consented to, never approved, captured by someone she once trusted and later betrayed by someone she once called sister. It had never fully disappeared, just submerged, waiting. Now it burst back into the current like sewage through cracked concrete. Her young face, her unguarded laugh, her body, her voice, her trust, broadcast without permission. The headlines turned cold. Governor's shameful secret resurfaces. What is Camille Reyes hiding from Survivor to Seductress, a popular talk show, ran a sit-down interview with her ex, the one who'd filmed it. He wore remorse like a suit that didn't quite fit. "We were kids," he said too smoothly. "She knew I had it. I never meant for it to get this far." Camille watched it in silence from her office. No tears, no fury, just breath. Slow, steady. Her hands were still. The room was so quiet she could hear the hum of the light fixtures. Her staff, on the other hand, unraveled in panic. "We should go legal cease and desist. We need a press conference now. Let's get ahead of it. Tell your side before they twist it worse." Camille stood slowly, walked to the window, and stared at the skyline. Her voice, when it came, was low but final. "No," she said. "Let them look." She turned back toward the room, eyes clear. "I've survived being seen before." But not all the backlash came from strangers. The phone rang. Private line. The name on the screen made her chest ache and clench all at once. Manuel Reyes. His voice hadn't aged, still sharp, still thunder-dressed as reason. "You're using our name," he hissed. "Dragging this family through the mud for your own attention. You think you're the only one who's suffered." Camille leaned against her desk, gaze on the city she'd built herself in. "I carried that name longer than you carried me," she replied, measured and calm. "I didn't stay, Reyes, to honor you. I stayed to remind myself who never to become." She hung up before he could answer. That night, her cousin called from San Antonio, whispering in the dark. Tia Teresa's in the hospital. Stress, her blood pressure. Camille didn't respond immediately. Instinct said, stay away. But something heavier overrode it. Duty, maybe, or clarity. She booked the next flight. The hospital room was dim. The machine beside the bed beeped in rhythm with fragility. Her mother looked smaller than Camille remembered, more human. The woman who had once spoken only with rosaries and silence now lay still beneath thin white sheets. When their eyes met, Teresa's lips trembled. "Camille," she whispered, voice brittle. "If what they say is true," her words cracked like frost. "Then I spent years not seeing you." Camille didn't answer. She just sat down. Not as a daughter asking for love, not as a woman offering forgiveness, just present. Before leaving, she opened her bag, pulled out a small canvas wrapped in linen, and placed it by the heart monitor. A painting she had finished months ago. A lone woman standing in the desert, her shadow long and distorted by the setting sun. She had titled it Witness. And then she left. No kiss, no closure. The family hadn't earned either. Back in Denver, the headlines still screamed. Reporters at her door, journalists combing through her college years, think pieces debating her morality, former classmates giving rehearsed anecdotes to tabloids. But Camille didn't flinch. At her next cabinet meeting, she entered as she always did, shoulders back, calm, deliberate. The air in the room buzzed with held breath. She stepped behind the podium. Her voice cut through the tension. I won't rewrite the past, she said, but I will decide how it's used from this point forward. She paused, not for effect, but for certainty. Then she opened the agenda like nothing had happened, and no one, no reporter, no official, no family member dared question her again. Because for the first time, Camille Reyes wasn't surviving the fire. She was walking through it, and she wasn't even warm. It came slowly like rot behind a painted wall. At first, Camille thought it was just noise background static from being too visible for too long, but something about the way the press turned sharper, more surgical, felt orchestrated. Then at 3:12 a.m., her phone buzzed, a single image, grainy, time-stamped, then another, screenshots, threads, fragments of the old scandal edited to look fresh. Her at 23 crying outside a shelter, her emails from a decade ago, her file notes from court support programs taken out of context, all compiled, all nameless, no signature, no direct threat, just a quiet, deliberate message. We still have the power to take you down by 9 a.m. Her comms director, Eva, stood in her office doorway, holding a tablet like it was a loaded weapon. It's already trending, Eva said. Someone put it together like a dossier. It's ugly. Camille took the tablet scanned. The headline read, "The Real Camille Reyes Proof. The governor built her career on a lie?" Beneath it were accusations framed as questions. Did she use fake identities to rise? Did she manipulate immigrant trauma for political gain? Did she erase her past or just hide it better than most? Camille stayed still. Is there a source, she asked. Eva shook her head. Anonymous. But the formatting, it's familiar. At noon, the call came. A quiet voice on the other end, low, cautious. I shouldn't be doing this, the man said. But I owe you. I used to intern under Delgado. A pause. Your father, he's been digging. Not just online, government files, old roommates, family medical records, through third parties' proxies. But it's him. Someone said he dropped your name at the Department of Justice. Said he was protecting the legacy. Camille closed her eyes. Not in shock, but in confirmation. It was never over. She hung up, walked to the window. The city was quiet beneath her. Her reflection stared back older now, sharper, harder. The girl they tried to erase had grown up into something they couldn't control. That evening she didn't call a press conference. She didn't tweet. She didn't beg for sympathy. She walked into a local community center, the one where she held her first policy workshop, and stood at a podium under a single spotlight. No flag, no anthem, no security. Just her and a wall of crayon-drawn posters from undocumented children thanking Miss Cam for helping their parents stay. She looked out at the small audience of reporters, staffers, and locals who had followed her work for years. Her voice when it came was firm, but not raised. I've learned something in politics, she said. Power doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears a last name. Sometimes it arrives as a phone call in the night. Or worse, a dinner invitation disguised as forgiveness. She inhaled. Sometimes it comes in the shape of the people who brought you into this world and expect you to stay quiet because of it. Then she introduced the Justice Witness Protection Bill, a law designed to criminalize the weaponization of personal trauma and family ties against public servants, whistleblowers, and advocates. It would make it illegal for family members, employers, or institutions to exploit someone's past for coercion or public manipulation. It was radical, personal, and unmistakably a line in the sand. She didn't say her father's name. She didn't need to. Every journalist in the room knew. Every lawmaker watching from behind the curtain knew. Every member of the Reyes family knew. That night, Camille turned off her phone. Not because she feared the noise, but because she had made peace with it. Let them post. Let them twist. Let them scream. She had faced the worst of herself already and walked out unshaken. Manuel never called again. Teresa didn't send prayers. Isabella went silent. But Camille. She walked through downtown Denver the next morning alone. No aid, no sunglasses, no disguise. Because when the people who tried to bury you realized they only planted you deeper, they dig harder, not to kill you, but to convince the world they knew you before you bloomed. And Camille Reyes had bloomed, not as their daughter, but as her own reckoning. The invitation didn't arrive on thick cardstock or come with any sentimental flourish. It arrived as a text message, 4 words that could have been mistaken for warmth if Camille didn't know the language of that house. Dinner this Friday, just us. Followed by 2 words she'd once begged to hear, but now barely registered. Please come. Camille stared at the screen for almost a full minute. Her thumb hovered over the message like it might bite her. She hadn't been inside the Reyes home in 15 years, not since that night when her father's voice sliced through the silence like judgment when her mother wouldn't meet her eyes, and when she walked out with nothing but a red backpack and the kind of silence that doesn't break, just grows heavier over time. She should have deleted the message, but she didn't, because something about the timing felt too convenient. Her mother's pleas rang not of remorse but of strategy. In that house, that word had never meant I'm sorry. It had always meant we need something. And still, against every instinct honed over years of abandonment, she went. She arrived just before sunset. The light was low and slanting, painting long shadows across the porch steps. The house looked smaller now, like time had pressed down on its roof and cracked the edges. Or maybe it wasn't the house that had shrunk. Maybe it was the weight Camille no longer carried. Before she could even lift her hand to knock, the front door opened. Teresa stood there trembling, her lipstick faded at the edges, mascara smudged beneath eyes that had forgotten how to blink. Mija, she breathed, like she was afraid saying the name out loud would break it. Camille didn't respond. Inside, the air was heavy with lemon oil and the kind of nervous energy that clung to walls too used to silence. The furniture gleamed as if scrubbed within an inch of its life. Nothing was out of place. Everything was curated, deliberate. Manuel stood by the fireplace in a crisp shirt posture, rigid as if backbone could make up for broken history. He looked at Camille but didn't say her name, didn't say welcome. Just nodded like this was a meeting, not a return. Isabella sat at the dining table, her hair pulled tight, head-bowed fingers twisting a linen napkin into knots. She didn't speak. Not yet. The room was the same. The chandelier above still cast soft golden light over the table where reputations had always mattered more than relationships. Camille's old chair had been reupholstered. New leather taut and dark, replacing the worn cushion she'd once sat in for 100 silent dinners. It looked like the past covered up polished pretending. The meal was elaborate, bordering on absurd enchiladas, rojo fresh tortillas folded in embroidered cloth, a flan so delicate it trembled in the dish. There was wine no one poured, candles no one lit. Conversation that tiptoed around everything real. Teresa offered brittle nostalgia in place of affection. Remember when you used to draw on napkins during dinner, she said, voice too bright, smile too rehearsed. You made that little castle with the crooked tower, remember? Manuel followed with mechanical praise. Your campaign posters were very professional, he said. I read one of your speeches last month. Quite impressive. Camille didn't answer. She let them act, let them perform the illusion of closeness. She had come to listen, and eventually the show faltered. It was after the dishes were cleared, when the silence stretched too long to ignore, that Isabella finally spoke. Her voice was thin, almost childlike. I know I messed up, she said, not lifting her gaze from the table. I didn't think it would go this far. There was no specificity, no admission, just an offering of regret without ownership. And then came the turn. Teresa reached out, but her hand paused midair, like even affection now had terms. "We were thinking," she began softly, "maybe you could write to the federal prosecutor. Nothing formal, just a letter, a character reference, family to family." There it was. Not an apology, not an attempt to repair, a request. Camille placed her fork down slowly, precisely. The metallic sound echoed like a verdict in the too-still room. She looked around the table. At the mother who had once closed the curtains instead of opening the door. At the father who had thrown her diploma onto a bed like trash. At the sister who had delivered her to ruin with one whispered sentence. Then, voice-level gaze unwavering, she asked, "If I weren't the governor, would I still be your blood?" The silence that followed was thick and absolute. No stuttering denials, no rebuttals, just guilt posing as stillness. Camille rose. The chair creaked beneath the shift, the new leather making a sound like breath held too long. She straightened her coat with a slow exhale. Her voice was almost gentle. "I kept your name," she said, "but I built my life without you in it." As she turned to leave, Teresa's voice cracked behind her. "Camille, please." But Camille didn't pause. Outside, the sky had darkened into a deep indigo. The air was cool and dry, as if it had been waiting for her to walk into it. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because it was never about home. It was about power. And for the first time, Camille understood hers completely. They hadn't invited her to reconcile. They'd summoned her to leverage her. And she had let them talk, not to heal, but to hear. To hear what they sounded like when their performance cracked and the mask of family slipped. It wasn't forgiveness that set her free. It was clarity. And in that clarity, she saw the table not as a symbol of legacy, but as a stage one she no longer needed to sit at. She could have flipped it with a single sentence. But she didn't. Because real power isn't what you use to crush others. It's what you choose to walk away from. Camille had learned long ago that the most lasting victories don't explode. They settle. So when the backlash hit, when family ties were twisted into tabloid headlines, when pundits dissected her past like autopsy reports she didn't run, she wrote. Not a memoir, not a press release, a bill. It was called the Public Kinship Act, but internally her team nicknamed it the Scalpel. Because that's what it was: precise, quiet, and designed to cut out a disease that most people refused to name. The core of the bill was deceptively simple. Any public employee, official, or candidate had the right to declare familial relationships as potential conflicts of interest without retaliation, defamation, or disqualification. That included abusive parents, criminally charged siblings, or any family member known to use proximity as pressure. It also established legal protections for whistleblowers from within families, allowing survivors of domestic political silencing to come forward without fear of being dismissed as emotionally compromised. For the first time, the law acknowledged that trauma can come in a familiar voice and that loyalty isn't always a virtue. Camille's team warned her, "This will be read as a personal vendetta." She nodded. Because it is personal. And that's what makes it necessary. She took the floor at the state legislative chamber without makeup, without notes. Her blazer was plain, her voice calmer than usual, but not soft. For too long, she said, "We've believed that conflict of interest only lives in campaign donations and lobbyist dinners. But what about blood? What about the dinner tables where threats are served alongside enchiladas? What about the daughters told they owe silence in exchange for shelter? Or the sons who learn that telling the truth about their father means losing their last name?" She looked up, straight into the eyes of the room. This bill isn't about punishing families. It's about freeing those who survived them. Her words didn't thunder. They cracked, and in that cracking, something shifted. A Republican lawmaker from Colorado Springs, a man who'd barely made eye contact with her in 2 years, stood and said quietly, "I know someone this could have saved. I vote yes." The committee passed the bill in 48 hours. By the end of the week, national headlines screamed Governor Reyes drafts law from family trauma. A new era of ethical transparency begins in Colorado. Blood is no longer immunity. Camille declined interviews. She issued no victory statement. Instead, she held a quiet meeting with her legal staff, updating language in another upcoming proposal about survivor support funds. She didn't celebrate, but Eva, her comms director, paused before leaving the room and said, "You know they're going to teach this bill in law schools, right?" Camille didn't look up from her notes. "Good," she said. "Maybe someone will recognize it before it happens again." Back at her apartment that night, she lit a single candle. No photograph this time, no ritual, just stillness. Then she reached into a drawer and took out an old object she hadn't touched in over a decade, her red freshman year backpack. She unzipped it and pulled out a half-burned notebook. Inside were old scribbles, sketches from her college days. The last page held a sentence written in her own encoded language. She translated it now, lips moving silently. "If they use your pain to silence, you turn the echo into law." She closed the book, placed it back where it belonged, and sat beside the window. She hadn't just survived her family. She had legislated her way through them, and now they would have to live in a world shaped by the daughter they had tried to erase. Just after noon, a quiet knock tapped against Camille's office door, measured hesitant. Her assistant stepped in halfway, voice lowered as if the name alone could stir something too dangerous. "Ma'am," she said gently, "Isabella Reyes is in the lobby." Camille looked up from the judicial reform draft she'd been marking for hours, pen still hovering mid-thought. The name didn't land with the weight it once carried. It didn't pierce or scorch. It echoed hollow and faint, like hearing a song you used to cry to, but now only recognized the melody of. She didn't flinch. She didn't sigh. "Did she make an appointment?" Camille asked, her eyes never leaving the page. "No," the assistant said quietly. "She just asked to see you. Alone." There was a pause, not of indecision, but of choice. Then Camille nodded once. "Send her in." The assistant vanished. Camille slowly capped her pen and cleared her desk of everything except a single glass of water. No aides remained, no cameras, no security detail. The moment didn't require armor because there was nothing left to protect. When Isabella entered, it was as though she were stepping into a courtroom without a defense. Her face was pale and bare, the confidence that once gleamed from her like steel, now dulled into fatigue. Her eyes were sunken, rimmed with old tears. She wore a plain blouse, faded jeans, and an expression that looked like surrender had finally outrun pride. She hovered in the doorway, unsure of how to occupy the space. "I didn't know how to start," she said softly, her voice unfamiliar in its vulnerability. Camille didn't respond. She didn't need to. So Isabella crossed the room and sat. Not with composure, but with collapse. The desk between them felt more like a demarcation line, now a no man's land, carved by silence, betrayal, and everything that had been said too late or not at all. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then with a voice dry and fraying, Isabella said, "I ruined everything." She stared at her hands, her fingers twitching slightly, as if they remembered the weight of decisions they'd never fully owned. "I destroyed whatever we could have been as sisters," she said, each word dragged from her throat. "Before I even knew I was jealous of you." Camille didn't react, but the stillness in her body was its own language, listening, not judging. "I thought being the good daughter meant being flawless. It meant staying untouchable. And when you wouldn't play the part, Isabella looked down, ashamed. "I thought if I could bury what you were, I'd be safe. That Dad would still respect me." that Mom wouldn't worry, that I'd matter more. A pause. Then she looked up, and for the first time her voice cracked. But the truth is, you became everything I tried to be, and you did it with no one on your side. You didn't just survive Camille. You built something from nothing. You made them listen. Her throat tightened, and now I sit here, and I know I lost. Not just the career, not the respect. I lost you. I lost everything that mattered. Camille let the silence linger, long enough for the words to settle, long enough to become real. Then, in a voice calm and sure, she answered, "You didn't destroy me, Isabella. You just forgot I existed." She met her sister's gaze, now eyes steady. And when someone is forgotten long enough, they remember how to become unforgettable. Isabella blinked her breath, hitching quietly. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of something she could no longer carry alone. "Mom still thinks you'll save me," she whispered, almost apologetically. Camille turned toward the window, the city unfolding beyond the glass like a living map of choices made and paths walked alone. "I'm not here to save anyone," she said. "I saved myself so no one could drown me again." Isabella nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in acceptance. She stood to leave, wiping her palms on her jeans as if trying to brush off the past. As she did, her hand brushed the edge of Camille's desk. Her eyes caught a corner of paper sticking out from beneath a folder, faded, slightly crumpled. She reached toward it, lifting the edge. A draft letter, typed, formal, unsent. Her name at the top, a plea for clemency. The date was weeks old. Her lips parted. No question came, just realization. "You were going to help me?" she said. Camille still didn't look at her. "I was going to try," she replied evenly, until I remembered who called Dad the day the video leaked. Isabella's mouth opened again, but this time no words arrived. There was nothing left to defend. She walked to the door. Her hand paused at the knob for the briefest second. Then the door closed behind her with a quiet final click. Camille sat back down, picked up her pen, and returned to the reform draft waiting on her desk. Some legacies can't be rewritten, but they can end with you. The hall wasn't grand. No velvet curtains, no ornate chandeliers. Just rows of folding chairs, a stage lined with modest lights, and the hum of voices, low, steady, like a field waiting for the first drop of rain. It was the first national conference on family justice reform. Survivors, lawmakers, whistleblowers, and those who had once been silenced now gathered in the same space to be seen finally not as liabilities, but as leaders. Camille stood backstage watching the final montage play on the screen. Faces blurred for safety, voices distorted, captions recounting betrayal by fathers, husbands, siblings, bosses. A montage of truth, long buried. The moderator's voice echoed into the crowd. "Please welcome our final speaker, a woman who needs no introduction because her work has already introduced her. Camille. No title, no last name. Just Camille." She stepped into the light slowly, deliberately. Her heels didn't echo, they grounded. The podium bore no seal. The screen behind her read only one word, witness. She didn't raise her voice. "I was once called a disgrace." She began, eyes scanning the room. "Then I was erased. Then I was threatened not with weapons, but with memory. With family dinners that were actually courtrooms. With silence dressed up as love." The audience leaned in. They didn't clap. They listened. "I'm not here today because I survived. I'm here because I stopped trying to be saved. Because one day I stopped apologizing for breathing louder than they preferred." She paused, letting the silence settle before the final cut. "I'm not asking anyone here to forgive what can't be forgotten. I'm asking us to stop carrying what was never ours to hold. Pain, shame, secrets, guilt. We don't owe our loyalty to the hands that silenced us. We owe it to the people we're still becoming. She looked toward the second row. Her mother was there, Teresa Reyes, older now, smaller. Her hands folded tight in her lap like she was praying for the first time in years. No tears, just stillness. 2 seats away, Manuel sat in a simple shirt, no badge, no title, arms crossed, but not as armor, just out of habit. He didn't scowl, he didn't nod, he just looked, not at the governor, not at the scandal, at Camille. She held his gaze, not in defiance, not in hunger, just in clarity. She finished simply, "We don't choose where we come from, but we get to choose where we stand. And today, I'm standing exactly where they thought I'd never belong." Silence followed. Not the awkward kind, the reverent kind, the kind that replaces applause when words are too sacred to clap for. Camille stepped off stage. No flowers waited for her, no media storm. Just a few quiet nods, a hand on her shoulder from someone who once testified against their brother. A whispered, "Thank you," from a staffer in a trembling voice. Outside snow had begun to fall thin, clean, and unbothered. Camille wrapped her coat tight and walked alone down the street. Past the cameras, past the questions, past the need to prove anything anymore. Because she had already done the one thing they told her was impossible, she had turned ashes into seeds, and then planted herself.